Hey, readers and writers, I'm Adrian Buskey, and this is Fictitious, a show about the storytelling craft of science fiction and fantasy. In this episode, I'm joined by Sarah Beth Durst, author of The Bone Maker. In this standalone fantasy novel, a team of renowned heroes are reunited after 25 years to avenge a painful loss and once again face a dangerous force of dark magic. But the decades between a great victory and the reunion have not been kind to their minds, bodies, and friendships, and some of them are willing to break the most sacred laws of their land to restore what they love most. The Bone Maker is character-driven epic fantasy, available now from Harper Voyager. And Sarah, welcome to Fictitious.
Thank you so much for having me here. I've been really looking forward to this.
I mean, I've been aware of your work for quite a while. You're a very prolific writer. It's something like 20 novels at this point.
Yeah, the Bone Maker is number 22.
22. Okay. As somebody who has yet to finish his first one, I want to know what's the secret. I know there's no secret, but what is the secret for you? Like, how does that work?
You write a lot, like all the time. I mean, that's pretty much literally all I do. So it's what makes me happy. I mean, it's how I kind of define myself. When I'm writing, I feel like the world is balanced. I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And if I skip a day, everything feels off kilter. So I try to write every day. I write anytime my hands are free and I can get near the computer. I'm stringing sentences together. And that's how I've written that many books.
Just write until something's done, right? And then repeat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just tell yourself that it doesn't have to be perfect the first time, but the more that you write, the more odds there are of something being in there that you love and you can pluck out and grow into a whole story.
That makes a ton of sense. And I mean, I think it's the best advice a writer can have, which is write and then write and write like your life depends on it, right? Write like you're running out of time, to quote something popular. So, like you said, this is novel 22, and this is a standalone. And that's a thing I appreciate, because I was having this discussion with some of my friends recently where we were kind of in the debate where, like, some of my friends are in that mode of, like, they want a series. They want 19 books. If they like something, they want to read it forever. And there's others of us that have hit that point of, whether it's attention span issues or just, like, what we like to feed our brains with, we like something that's one and done or more concise or, like, knows its story and gets it done. So I appreciated seeing standalone novels pass across my desk, because I think that's pretty awesome. I give a little bit of a description at the top. It really leaves a whole lot out, considering even like what the title, means and who these particular characters are. So how about we start off with you giving me like the elevator pitch for this novel? What is The Bone Maker about?
Bone Maker is about second chances. And it's about, and bone magic, obviously. It's about these 5 heroes after they defeated the great evil, after the great war was won, and they ride off into the sunset. And then what happens when the sun rises again and again and again? They think their story is over, but it is emphatically not. And they are not the same as they once were back in the day. So yeah, that's what it's about. And I love writing. Wait, I'm going to hold it up because I have a copy and it makes me so happy.
Well, I imagine even after 22 times, every single time that it arrives in your hands, it's got to feel pretty satisfying for it to be tangible and real.
It does not get old at all. Yeah. I mean, being a writer is the only thing I've ever wanted to do. Except when I was 5 and desperately wanted to be Wonder Woman. Every time a book comes, I think of my 10-year-old self and think of how she would be like doing cartwheels, and it makes me happy. So.
Well, I think 22 books qualifies you as Wonder Woman in the writing and publishing world. So I think you can get the tiara. I think you'd be good. I like that you mentioned in here about the premise of the story is that it is about second chances. I think that it's also a lot about, rekindled friendships and the complications of friendships over time. I am somebody I'm 43 years old. I have my closest friend base have been my friends for 20 some odd years now. I have friends that, stretch back further. I have people that I met in the last 10 years or less or at Comic-Cons and things have become very important to me. But friendships change, context complicates, baggage weighs you down, and your life takes you in different directions. And so those are things that can always create conflicts for lifelong friendships, and that is something at play for these characters in this story. Also, there's a lot of trauma and PTSD and issues that these characters are dealing with, because they may be renowned heroes of legend, but they really went through some stuff to do there, and that has a lot of impact. Thematically, thinking about that going into this story, and I will preface by saying that, like, when we talk about themes, it sounds very English majory, and some authors go into a story thinking, oh, there's a thing I want to talk about, and other ones go, I want to tell a story. Oh, it was about something. There's a lot of different ways to discover that. For you going into this, were you conscious of those ideas from the start and the creation of this story? Were they things that developed along the way? How did that look for you thematically?
Honestly, both. I knew going into it that I wanted this theme of second chances, and I wanted to deal with how these characters' lives continued and how they dealt with all the baggage that came before. Because yes, saving the world is this grand thing, but there are costs. There's a price that you pay, both emotionally and mentally, physically as well. They bear the scars inside and out of what they went through. And they bear the consequences of all of the choices that they made after that monumental event, where they took their lives after, how they dealt with the consequences and the fallout and the change to themselves and the world, their perception of themselves, the world's perception of them. I did have that in mind going in. And I definitely left myself open too for seeing where it went. I have definitely gotten to the end of writing drafts of books, gotten to the end and go, oh, that was what that was about. I've also had the experience where readers have gotten back to me and like, oh, you wrote this book about power and ways in which it affects people. I'm like, yes, I did.
Totally did that. I was always the plan.
Right. So I think both are at play, the author's intention and what comes out through the subconscious in terms of the things that you care about. That's always going to seep through whether you plan for it to happen or not. So the answer to your question is both. Yes.
That brings up something, and I don't think I've ever asked this question of anybody on the show before, but I think it makes sense thinking about the big backlog that you have. Like, you have 22 novels out now. Something that I always think is interesting is that if you spend a lot of time with an author's work, you do find themes that recur. You find that there are things that subconsciously or consciously that are important to them, that they're working through, that they're exploring in their works. And it seems to be things that once you really get to know an author, you'll find that it's core to who they are as a creative. For you, have you noticed those things now? Have you recognized that there are things that you re-explore a lot?
I love that you asked that because it's so true. Like after you write a few books, you start to notice what you're obsessed with. And one of the things I have found that I'm obsessed with is, what does it mean to be a hero? What does it mean to be strong? And I love playing with different meanings of what it means to be strong. Who gets to be the hero? Who gets to tell the story? Who gets to label who you are? Do you choose your label? Is it placed on you? What do you do with that? And that seems to thread through a lot of my stories, whether it's intentional or not.
It's always fun to look at those things because I think it reflects what a person is ruminating on in the time when they're not writing, and how they're looking at the world and how they're examining it. And I think obviously the things that concern you in real life will work their way into the novels. And I think we're at a point in time where like there's a million more celebrities than there were before. There's people who walk around with a sort of hero status, somewhat undeserved a good portion of the time, or that are like lionized in certain niches, lifted up on pedestals. And so exploring that idea of like why people reach this way. Granted, like an epic fantasy, it's a little bit more glorious maybe in the sense of like big battles and epic conclusions and whatnot, rather than, somebody who's really good on TikTok or whatnot. But certainly those themes resonate in real life. And I think that exploring them in fiction is always very interesting and helpful and illuminating. Jumping off from theme, there's also the idea of trope. trope is the tightrope between building block and cliche, because they're the things that we can see a lot, and we'll see it in fiction and media and stories and stuff all the time. Repetitive pieces that we can recognize and go, oh, I know what that thing is. How it's used is what defines the quality of it. Were you aware in constructing this story of any of those kinds of tropes that you were playing with, or were there anything as you kind of reached the end, talk to beta readers, talk to editors and stuff, they're like, oh, you're doing the thing, and you're like, I don't know, I was doing the thing. Anything like that?
I try to always know when I'm doing the thing. I love tropes. I think they are such a fantastic tool for a writer. And they're especially wonderful in fantasy, because fantasy literature goes back, so far back, Epic of Gilgamesh back. And you have, readers that come to it have all of these expectations for what you're going to do with this kind of story. You introduce someone there, they're like, you're the chosen one, you're the whatever, you're the betrayer. And they come with these expectations. So what that means for a writer is that you can either lean in hard and fulfill them and create this moment that resonates with everything that's come before, or you can subvert it and create a dialogue with what's come before. One of the tropes I was specifically playing with Bone Maker is the idea of the band of heroes. These characters, if you distill them down to kind of their core, you will find that Dungeons and Dragons, Dragonlance band of 5 here. I specifically picked 5. We've got our paladin, our cleric, our warrior, our thief, and our mage. And at their core, and it's like, okay, what happens to them 25 years later with these friendships, with these experiences, with these personalities layered on top of that trope?
I love that you mentioned that, because that is something that's kind of come up a lot more recently on the show is the influence of role-playing games, and then the fiction, that's come out of role-playing games and stuff like that. Because if there's anything that plays with archetype and trope really on its sleeve, it is things like D&D. And the beauty of it is that those tropes allow an easy access for people where they can come in and go, oh, I get this. I understand what these things are. I've seen them played out in several different ways. But then the way they work can be like endless. And that's the fun of this stuff. It was something I was thinking about when I was reading this is, we'll talk a lot about the magic system here in a minute, but there is a bone-based magic system. And what struck me, because of what I do and all the books that come across my desk for the show and all the things that I read, is that there are like 3 different novels I've read recently that have bone magic as like a core piece. And they're all radically different. None of them feel the same. The magic doesn't work the same. You could say, oh, it has bone magic. And you're like, well, cool. Like the Bone Shard Daughter has bone magic, and the Forever Sea has bone magic, and the Bone Maker has bone magic. But none of them are the same. None of them feel similar. The way they're executed are completely different. And so that's the thing I think is always interesting when trying to talk about pieces of things that we recognize or ideas. As we're speaking, there's a raging Twitter debate about copyright and how long authors should be able to hold on to it and things like that. And if I talk about it too much, I'll get ragey. But something that people will talk about sometimes is that ideas shouldn't be copyrightable. They should just be out in the open for anybody to use. And so that copywriting stories is copywriting an idea which you can't own. And that's ridiculous, because a story is not an idea. An idea is a piece. It's a building block. It's a starting point. Stories are the execution of ideas, and they are the development to the end, like in a lot of hard labor in order to make that thing real and exist. And trope and ideas are just kind of the same thing. They're starting points, but they are the thing that you build out of. So I like that you're aware of those, because it's good to know. I think that I think you have a better chance of subverting a cliche if you know where you're going with it head on, and you know how you can twist it and surprise the audience. It gives you a new tool in your toolbox when you can do that. It's also, I think, worth noting that this novel is sometimes described as dark fantasy, and certainly there's darkness in this story. To me, though, there's a lighter tone because it's so conversational. It's a very dialogue-heavy novel. I mean, front and center is the relationships between these characters. I can't help. We'll talk a little bit about Kreia and Zira, the kind of what I think are the heart of the novel, those 2 characters, in a bit. But I just got done watching WandaVision, and because of the influence, you can never shake those things. Zira is just like Catherine Hahn in my head now. So like that big personality. Zira is
Yeah,
super extra,
yeah,
and yeah, and so like as soon as she came on and started talking and doing her thing, and I was just like, Catherine Hahn appeared in my head and was just there, and I was like, cool, got that. All right, that's casted in my head already, ready to go.
I
Uh,
love.
and because of their back and forth, because of how fraught their particular dynamic is, a thing that were like, you have people who were like the best of friends and allies and now have a lot of issues between each other. A lot of it's very fun. A lot of that banter is snappy and entertaining, and it gets a lot of the heavy lifting of the world building done in those conversations and stuff too. All things I'll circle around to. One thing I do want to know is like, what drew you to this dynamic of having the older heroes? You've talked about like, you're talking about the idea of like what it means to be here and all those things. But I think that, we're used to in fantasy seeing the young hero setting off and, and maybe there's an old mentor who dies along the way, like an Obi-Wan, that classic hero's journey kind of thing. But I think that it's really refreshing as a person of 43 to find people that show up in a story who are not like, YA heroes. So what's the appeal of that? And like, how does that work for you as far as examining characters with that kind of baggage behind them?
Right. I mean, it was exactly that. I've read a lot of epic fantasy. I mean, you can see my bookshelves over across the way. They're pretty much all girl with sword, girl with riding dragon, so forth. I've been very consistent in my love of fantasy throughout my entire life. And I've always worried about what happens after the end. I mean, any good world that exists, any good story is going to have the feeling that it goes on. And I've always wondered what happens when it goes on. So that's part of what got me thinking about it. The other choice of the aging heroes was I just wanted to see them as heroes. I wanted the story to say, you don't peak at 18. It's okay. Things happen later. You can have adventures again. You can conquer things. You were talking a little bit about whether the book is dark fantasy or not. I think I would qualify it as dark fantasy simply because of the amount of necromancy in it. But it does have that core of hope in it. That's something that I feel very strongly belongs in my fantasy books. Because fantasy, I mean, it is a literature of hope. It's a literature of empowerment. It says, look, this horrible thing can happen. This great evil can come, but you can survive it if you find the strength inside you. I've heard the term hope punk and solar punk and optimistic fantasy and classic fantasy. And I think that's kind of where I come from, that worldview of, yes, I personally would last about 5 seconds in this world before I died, but the human spirit can survive.
The idea of like hope punk and all those different labels has come up a lot on the show lately, and because there are people who have definite big feelings about some of those phrases and sub niches, but I think in a moment in time where things have been very grim for a number of years, and a lot of us have felt, even as we might sit in a place of relative comfort, some of us, when we're lucky, still the world feels dark and difficult and fraught and combative, and reading something that's not another dystopian that does have a core of light and hope at it is really helpful. For me anyway. I'm not like one of those people that it's like, wow, everything sucks. I need to read some stuff about like dystopian, dark, awful places where everything blows. I don't want to go watch The Walking Dead right now. Like, that's not how I want to spend my time. And I love grimdark, but that's maybe not where my head needs to be unless I'm just at a ball of rage inside, and that's the way I can get out of it. But mostly I want to find something that lifts me out of it. And so I appreciate that. Like I said, there's necromancy and stuff in here, and it's all very specific around the bone thing, like I was talking about earlier. So probably I think we should talk about what's at work in this world. What does this world look like? What is the bone magic? How does that power everything in this world? So like what is the setting and how does the magic work?
I love creating magic systems. So fun. I decided very early on that it was going to be bone magic. Actually, it was kind of like a random way that I decided that. I had this image in my head of I wanted to write about a character with a coat that had many pockets in it. And I asked myself, so what's in those pockets? And my brain immediately said bones. So I knew that I had this vision of this silver-haired woman in this long faded blue leather coat, and she would reach in and she would pull out this sort of talisman, a bone that was carved and it could do stuff. Then I had to decide what could it do. So in this world, my bone magic, there are three different kinds of bone magic you can work. You can be a bone maker. And so what you do with that is you use the bone to animate an inanimate object, basically creating these constructs that will do whatever it is you design them to do based on what sort of bone it was that you used. They're the bone wizards that take bones and create them into talismans that can imbue a person with that power. For instance, stealth or flight or strength or speed, depending on what kind of bone is used and what sort of magic the bone wizard works with it. And then we have the bone readers, who I sort of took from that folkloric idea of throwing the bones and seeing the future. So they prophesy, they can see glimpses of the future. And those are the three kinds of magic. And the world is built up around the fact that those three magics exist.
So there's a level of tech in this world too. So I mean, it's a fantasy world, and it would be kind of like a low tech world with high tech pieces, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because there are cable cars in this. There's this the city that Kreia visits at the beginning, which is sort of like center of culture for them, and it literally has these like cloud engraved discs that you can get on, and there's almost like an escalator that sort of just takes you up like the mountainside as you go through these tiers of the city. There are carriage crawlers, things that like literally have like 6 legs like a spider and a carriage on them, and you can use them to scale mountains and stuff. So there are pieces that feel like steampunk isn't the right phrase, but it's what people use sometimes, I think, to kind of describe any type of tech that shows up in fantasy. But it's all part of this.
It is bone punk. I'm like, I like that. So this is bone punk.
There we go. Bone punk. We figured it out. We found the sub niche. But it's worth noting that like the bones that everybody is using through this, well, most everybody, dun dun dun, are animal bones. And in a world where bones are like the most powerful resource available to you, human bones are strictly off limits. They're a no-no. People burn their dead. Their rituals for funerals are very specific around preserving the body in such a way that nobody can take the bones. And that's important right up front because our character Kreia is out to steal some, which doesn't paint her as like, you know, super groovy in the sense of the morality of the world, but she has a very understandable reason for doing that. I want to talk about like, why something like that, when you have that most precious of resources, why a whole world would say, no, you can't have those. And what does that mean for Kreia as our kind of, like basically I think of her as our anchor character. She's kind of the core POV of the story. What does that create as a conflict of conscience when she realizes that she can use those for something positive?
Yeah, when I do world building, I do it by making a single decision and then chasing down the consequences of that decision. So when I decided that I was going to use bone magic, I started thinking about, okay, what bones are we using? What bones are okay? What are the effects of them? So forth. How would people feel about this in a society? How would you feel if your loved one died and you find out his femur is powering that carriage that's going across town? That would be a little bit disturbing. So this taboo developed around that these bone workers are not allowed to use human bones because that could be your loved one that they're using to fuel their cleaning device. And like that was not okay with people just emotionally. So it became this great taboo. And any bone worker caught using human bones would be burned. It's punishable by death right off the bat. But Kreia's husband has died. And she has found some forbidden texts and done some research that leads her to believe that human bones will bring him back. So that's where she begins the story. I loved writing my first chapter. So going across to steal the bones of a dead child, I'm like, I would say that's a little dark. but she really does have a good reason.
It is interesting to start off the novel where you've got a character doing something that you can tell knows it's reprehensible. No, it brings on the ire of a lot of people. It is definitely a dark move. But, you know, you quickly recognize that, you know, her husband is one of these heroes of this team from back in the day and fell on the battlefield. He was the great loss in the middle of this bone war. And yet she has basically been waking him up periodically using this magic so that she can spend just a little bit of time with him, just to be with him for a little while she looks for a more permanent solution. But there's a sacrifice involved in that too. I think that all of us who have experienced loss know that feeling of what I wouldn't do for one more day, right? I think that any of us who have lost somebody know that that's something that, we would give up a lot to have that person in our lives, just even for a brief shining moment. Kreia finds a real way to do that, but what does that cost her? Both in the standpoint of what the magic costs her, but how the life of a recluse and being off the grid from her friends costs her as well.
Yeah, I mean, it has a tremendous cost because she is doing something forbidden in their culture. So she automatically has to cut herself off from everyone else that she'd cared about, from that support network that might have allowed her to handle her grief in a less illegal manner. But more than that, the magic that she discovered, for every day she gives her husband, she lives one day less. So that's the cost. That's the price of this kind of magic. You pay with your own future life. And you don't know how much of that life you have left to give. Only the magic knows.
Yeah, I mean, that's, as big a trade-off as you can, think about is that, like, 1-to-1, I give mine for yours. And again, I think anybody who has loved a family member, loved, a significant other knows that they would give that up in a heartbeat to sustain them. So very early on, we can go, oh, this is something that feels reprehensible. I would do that. Absolutely. And there's some very dark humor between Kreia and Gent, like her husband, when he's awoken, where they're like, oh, wow, how are we going to keep doing this? Because she's running low on these stores. It's becoming harder and harder to be able to go out and steal these things. She is a bone maker, which means that she can create constructs, and she is incredibly talented at that. But in order to do these other things, she needs bone talismans, because talismans are things that give you the strength and the speed and the stealth and other capabilities. And the best person to get that from is her basically former best friend, part of her band of heroes, who still is in the city, is a big time celebrity, and they haven't talked in 25 years. And there is big time bitterness hanging in the air between them. So that leads us to Zira and where she sits. This is the extremely extra Catherine Hahn character that I was talking about earlier. They have a really interesting dynamic. They're very much a compare and contrast kind of situation as far as their personalities, the lives they've lived. So what can you tell me about that character, and then how the interplay between those two kind of sets off the novel in a lot of ways?
Yeah, I loved writing her. As you can tell from the novel itself, I love dialogue in general. That is for me when the character comes to life, when I can hear their voice. And I do tend to infuse a lot of banter into it, because I firmly believe that humor is such a basic coping mechanism. It's how we deal with stuff. It's how we deal with the darkest of stuff, with the deepest of stuff. And it's how these characters deal with what they've gone through. They started out as the best of friends. 25 years ago, they went through this tremendously traumatic event, and then Kreia left. She walked away from that friendship, from everything, and it left Zira feeling betrayed. Here they went through this thing together. She expected to be able to go through the aftermath, through the grief, through everything that followed together, and she was denied that. And in walks in her friend after 25 years to ask a favor. And she is not okay with that. But then on the other hand, she's also not okay with turning her back on that much history of this person that she used to be incredibly close to. So a lot of the novel does center around them finding their way back to each other, finding the core of who they are together, as well as who they are as individual people.
Something that really resonates with me is seeing characters who both can walk into a room together and immediately pick up a conversation like it has, like it was yesterday. It's 25 years difference, but they can just do that. They walk in and just start talking. Because I have friends like that, friends I only see once every 5 to 10 years, and we walk into a room and just pick up like it never stopped, which is an amazing feeling in a lot of ways. But there are also times where I've had the people who have, I haven't talked to in 12 or 15 years, and they've called me up looking to couch surf for a while, or, they're out of sorts and they need something. And that's a complicated feeling to deal with, that trying to deal with the fact that you feel maybe some level of compulsion to help, or like you feel like you owe them because you have this this life behind you, but then you also have the life that you're in now that doesn't include them. And those things are not always compatible, the past and the present. So I think that's a very fun thing to explore. Like you said, the banter and the wit and the humor that generates, because we're humans. We find things funny even when things are super messed up. We have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's there's a reason why we have the term gallows humor, because we have to have some way of coping with the darkness around us, and that's a distinctly human thing to do. There are 3 other characters of this band, and I want to be careful how we talk about them, because I think that this novel is kind of structured around, like, the first half of it is sort of the reuniting of these characters. I guess that's spoilery to say that, but I mean that's the point of the story, right? Like, you get the trailer, you're going to see these characters walking together at some point, right? Who are some of these other characters? I mean, we've mentioned Gent, and we've mentioned that he's dead, mostly. Well, all the way, but occasionally not. And then there's also Strand and Marceau, who are that come into play with here too. So can you just walk me through the bird's eye view of who each one of these former heroes are, and what the 25 years later version of them looks like?
Yeah, Strand is their warrior. He's their fighter. He's the brawn of the group. And he has chosen to leave that behind and become a farmer. So he's chosen have a life after that, to have an ordinary life after being a hero. So he has a lot to lose. And Marceau is the bone reader. He's able to see the future, and it has broken him. And he has not known how to cope. It has shattered his mind, which makes him not exactly ideal for another adventure either.
Something I always think is also interesting to consider for characters like this is, after you've become notable for something, there's a vision of who you are that solidifies in people's minds. That this is who you are in that moment, and that's what always matters. And people are not necessarily, and I say like people as like a society, are not necessarily forgiving of people changing or evolving into something else, or understanding why the person who was famous would choose to become a recluse, why the person who is, like a pseudo celebrity, like the way that Zira is in this, and, flaunting wealth and influence and power, would choose to go off and do something reckless when all those things are on the line. How does this world accept a return of these heroes? How are they looked upon as they come into this? How does that world look like for them? Like, do they look around and they're like, 25 years later, we're very different, and now we're fulfilling this role again? What does that mean to be a part of that again?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely one of the things that I was playing with, is this idea of labels, is because not only did they feel like their story was over, but so did everybody else. Their heroes saved the day. They went off into the sunset. The end. They don't want to hear from them again. They want to keep them as statues, as pedestals, as these beings of awe. They don't want to see the nuance. They don't want to see mistakes. They don't want to see that different choices have been made. They don't want to have to reckon with what they went through before, because this society was traumatized as well. I mean, you go through something like being attacked by an army of inhuman bone animated warriors, you're going to be slightly traumatized, at least a few nightmares here and there. So the society is also trying to cope with this trauma, and the society would vastly prefer that the trauma stay in the past. That was the thing that happened and is done. They don't want it to come back.
I think that leads us into talking about kind of the big bad of the story, the big bad of the past, the big bad of the future. And there's a parallel that you mentioned there. I think that we have these assumptions sometimes that the great evil was defeated, and we will not speak of the great evil again. And we know from our own world that history rhymes, the past repeats, and things that we thought we stamped into the ground, if we leave any seed of it at all, it returns.
One of the things I was thinking about when I was writing is that evil doesn't stop. It doesn't go away. Maybe it goes underground for a little while, but if you pretend you vanquished it entirely, you're just fooling yourself. It's going to come back. And one of the things I wanted to say was, you can fight it again. It's not a one and done, but you can find the strength to go again. I mean, I think one of the things I love about fantasy is that feeling when you close a fantasy book, that you're stronger after it. you've had this escape into this world. You've gone through these adventures with them, and you come out and you feel, I can do this. I can conquer my dragons. So in this case, in Bone Maker, they may not be the same dragons we're facing here in our world, but it's equivalent. They could face them, and so can we.
The job of good is never done.
Yeah.
It can sometimes take a break, but not for too long, because if you get, you rest on your laurels too long, bad things happen again. The big bad here, you've mentioned this human bone magic, the forbidden kind, can create warriors and monsters and things that that the average person would find pretty horrific, and the heroes find pretty horrific too. This war has been fought in the past, but how does this reappear in this world? What is this, what does the return of darkness look like? And how does that summon the heroes from just a mission of, oh, hey, can we bring Gent back to life, to, oh no, we have to save everything all over again?
Yeah, they encounter a bit of their past that did not stay past, and returns, and they don't want to admit it. The world doesn't want to admit it, but that doesn't mean it's not there, and that they don't have to contend with it, and they have to choose whether they're going to step up or step aside so the next heroes can come, except they don't know where the next heroes are. No, it's them. They need to do it. And the story is a lot about them coming to that grasp of, life goes on. We have to choose every day how we face it. Are we going to be heroes again, always? Or are we going to let evil win this time?
One of the great things to examine as starting points for characters is, are they the people who immediately step up and be like, I will rise to the occasion? Or are they a person saying, they're going, somebody should do something about this?
Yeah. Right?
Oh, crap, it's me. Oh, no.
Yeah. Well, there's a constant feeling of you're always looking for a more adult in the room. Like, somebody's going to be grown up here. Oh, wait, it's me. Okay.
Yeah, I was definitely like in the last few years in the real world, I think we've seen that over and over again, where like we have a lot of people who are looking, oh, we have people that are supposed to do this for us and they're bad at it, so I guess we're going to have to do it ourselves. And I think that's a good realization to come to at a certain point, that you can't consistently rely on whoever the adult is in the room, because sometimes they're pretty bad at adulting. So you got to step up and do it yourself. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of some of the writing stuff here. Are you an outliner, pantser, discovery writer, some combination? What's that look like for you? Maybe you have your own fancy name for it. How's that work?
Yeah, no, I outline and then I ignore my outline. Is pretty much how it goes. There's did you watch The Flash?
I do not know. I don't watch any of the DC TV shows.
Well, there's this one episode of The Flash where they're with this bad guy, and he says, make the plan, execute the plan, watch the plan go off the rails, throw away the plan. I'm like, oh, that's how I write. There you go. Because I like to have a plan so that I know it has the feel that I want, that I have a novel-sized story here to tell. But I also like to leave myself open for that moment of discovery, of hearing what the characters' voices are and having new ideas. I always try to write by what I call the rule of awesome, where you make a decision about the world, about the characters, and then you ask yourself, okay, given that all this is true, what is the most awesome thing that could happen next? And that's what I try to write.
It makes me think a little bit of, there's a writer named Rob Hart, who I interviewed a couple of years ago at Comic-Con, back when those were things we could do. And he talked about how his outlining method was, he would sit down, outline the entire novel, and then throw it away. He would just I was like, oh God.
Oh my God.
But he basically, it's like, he would outline it like soup to nuts, then delete the file or print it and shove it in a drawer or something like that. I don't know. I mean, it sounded like extreme, like salt the earth kind of things. I don't think I could do that. But his reasoning is that he would have figured out everything that he wanted to do with it. And then he would toss that thing, give himself a little space, and then start writing based on his memory of it. And so basically, to him, he was like, everything that was the most important and the things that worked best would stay sharp in his memory, and all the loosey-goosey stuff that wasn't as good would disappear. And so he would find his way through the stories where he would continue to discover the story while still knowing the beats he wanted to hit. And that, for him, that worked. That idea scares the heck out of me, but at the same time, I was like, oh, there's something to be said for that, because no plan survives the battlefield. And so for him, not being glued to the plan gave him, this kind of different ability, but it's also terrifying.
I never delete anything. That just horrifies me to think about that. But I do think that approach is somewhat like that. Like the first draft, you're looking at the story through a little hole in the wall. And like the second, the hole's wider. And then you get a window and then door. Then you open the door. And then by the final one, you're actually inside the room with the story going all around you. And like it would be so lovely if you could see the inside the room from the first draft, but you can't always see all of it. You can't hold it all in your head. You haven't discovered it or learned all of it yet. And revising is figuring out those details that are going to bring it to life all around you. I mean, I do up to about 30 drafts per novel,
Whoa.
which is a little excessive, I know, but
30? You've written
yeah,
22 novels and you write 30 drafts a novel?
I do. I do. But a lot of those drafts are fast drafts where I will focus on one feature, like going through and getting the breath of it right, getting the rhythm of it right, or going through and getting the music of the language right, or just dropping the information to make sure I've seeded what the reader needs to know for how the magic works. And so I'll just go chronologically through many, many times, touching each sentence as I go, addressing one or two aspects each time. I don't try to climb the mountain all at once. It's too much. I try to get it piece by piece, and each time through, I can see it a little clearer and choose a better detail to bring it to life.
That sends me into a raw panic. I admit I was back here like having to mop the brow. What do you write in then? Like what are your tools of the trade? Like what software, what analog stuff? How do you manage the process of that many drafts?
I have a lot of subfolders. I just use Word. I just use Word, and for I have a folder system, one folder for the novel, and then I have sort of my master document there and there, and then I have a folder for I call just scenes, and one called thoughts, one research, outline, and I will open up a Word doc for each scene. I will write the scene. I'll rewrite the scene. I'll rewrite it, save it each time, and when I like it, I paste it into the master document. And then when I go through and I do that, and then I label this draft one, and then I do it again. I take each scene out, put it into a Word doc, revise it till I like it, and stick it in. I label that draft two. Probably is fancier software I could use to do that, but Word's fine.
I'm terrified and traumatized right now. But
Sorry.
Obviously it works. Oh no, it's amazing. Learning every author's process and how they do things and how they're radically different. I think it's one of the great things about doing the show, and that I hope that the people that are watching and listening to it recognize is that this process doesn't look the same for anybody. It is very much something that you have to find that works for the way your brain is wired, for the way your time works, for how your attention span functions, and that there is no one great way where somebody says, okay, now write exactly like this. This is how I did this, because it doesn't one-to-one shift for every person. It's all about finding the thing that works best for the way you work. So even though that terrifies me, at the same time, it clearly works, because you are, prolific and productive. And I mean, that's right. Like you wrote 600 and like, I can't math, like, drafts of novels to get to those 22. But like you said, I mean, there's fast drafts, there's minute changes, there's things focused on various pieces. So that does make a lot of sense. Even if it scares me, I understand it and I respect it. Thinking about pacing in stories like in this, like I said, this novel is character and dialogue driven far more so than it is about like heavy world building per se. But that means that you have to let dialogue do the heavy lifting of like info dumps and kind of explaining things that are going on. I think it makes sense when you have people that have a lot of issues with each other to get into the room and to give the exposition because they've been stewing on something for 20 years and they're like, no, I'm going to talk. You're going to shut up and listen to me. I'm going to talk to you about this thing, and I'm going to go through the details again. I'm going to tell everybody in this room how I feel because like, and I mean, and I'm speaking of Zero here because like, she likes to monologue. Clearly I do too. But when it comes to pacing a novel like that, what did that look like for you? What was the editorial feedback on that? Like, how do you manage that to get here's the dialogue, here's the action, here's the exposition? What does that look like for you?
I love doing the world building, and I love the story behind it and the adventure, but how we experience the world of a novel, how we experience a story, the only reason we care and the reason we turn pages is because the characters are the vessel that take you through the world. So I write in very close third person, and I try to always see the world through the eyes of whoever the point of view character is in a particular scene. Bone Maker, I use multiple points of view. So you get different views on the world, the other characters, their place in it, and so forth. And I believe that the way to make a world and a story really come to life is to be as true to those characters as possible. So I don't approach it from I have this information I need to deliver, but what would that character be ranting about right now? What is their truth? And I think it's Ursula K. Le Guin that said fantasy isn't real. It's not fact, but it's true. And I try to write from that place. If you're as true to these characters as possible, then everything else will feel real.
Then I guess the last thing is, do you use any kind of like plotting system or framework? I mean, there's a lot of things, whether it's as traditional as, you know, a 3 or 4 act structure. There's things like Save the Cat or 7-point structure or Story Circle or dozens of others. Is there anything like that you think about, whether early in the draft or when you're kind of examining where the story is going?
Star Wars, absolutely. Star Wars Episode 4. That imprinted on me at a very, very young age as this is the quintessential story, that hero's journey feel of venturing out, going into the unknown, and hopefully coming back, but definitely coming back changed. That feels like a satisfying story structure to me. And so most of my novels do follow a classic build, and then, you know, English teacher would describe it. But yes, I mean, I adore writing craft books. I love thinking about structure. But when I get to the actual writing, I try to shove all that aside and trust that I've internalized that I've internalized what the story beats feel like, so that I'm not imposing it from the outside, but it's in there because of all that I've read, all that I've seen. I mean, I think that's true for everyone that's trying to write a book. If you get stuck on plot, trust yourself. You have seen and absorbed so many stories. You know what you like. Just write what you like and don't write any of the other boring stuff.
I like that too. Well, like I said at the top, The Bone Maker, as of the time that this episode releases, will be out from Harper Voyager with that pretty cover right there. Can't miss it. Front and center, big text. But also, like we said, there you also have, 21 other novels, and I'm sure more on their way. So where should people stay up to date with you? Where are the places where you're online where they can learn about your work, see the backlog, learn what's coming up next, all that kinds of stuff? Where do they find you?
You can always visit my website. It's just sarahbethdurst.com. I've got all my books on there, everything that's coming, excerpts from everything. I'm also on Twitter at Sarah Beth Durst, and Facebook, Sarah Beth Durst, Instagram, Tumblr. I'm there.
You lock down the name. That was really smart. You get it the same in all the places, and that's the way to handle it. Like I said, the book is out now. I'd hold it up, but it's digital in the thing. You put it up there again. And like I said, I mean, there's a huge backlog of other, and you do have longer series, you have some other stuff, but I think this is a really good introduction. If this is people's first time reading your work, this is a good place to jump in with a standalone story to get a sense for it, and then they can dig into the backlog as well. And this is really fun. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me on Fictitious.
Thank you so much. I had a great time.